Hey everybody, Moto Poet 59 here, talking a little bit about corporate greed. I am sick of hearing about corporate greed, especially from conservatives. If you're a conservative and you're whining about corporate greed, you're not really a conservative. You're more leaning toward the rhino side of things. We live in a capitalist society with a free market economy, and corporations were created from the very beginning to be greedy. They are there to make money. They're not there to make friends. They're not there to make allies. They're there to make money. And the more money a corporation makes, the more dividends it can pay out. If it's a publicly traded company, the more dividends they can pay out, that attracts investors that money can then be used to expand the corporation or pay a better dividend. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the reason they're there. They get money infused in, they can expand their business, they can expand the corporation, they can hire more people. Corporate greed is what puts people to work. It's what keeps people working. I do volunteer work at a railroad museum. And up on one of the walls at this museum is a timeline of, it's a railroad museum, and it's a timeline of the railroad being from when it was built to the present over the Tehachapi, the Tehachapi Pass, which belongs to Union Pacific and is a joint facility with BNSF, and yada yada yada. But at the beginning of that timeline is the story of the Big Four, a small blurb about it, and then there's another place where we have a big story of them too. And the Big Four were Leland Stanford, Charles Crocker, Mark Hopkins, and Collis Huntington. And those men are the ones who started the Central Pacific Railroad. And I have listened to quite a few people come through there, and I give tours. I'm a docent there, and they'll go, "Oh, the robber barons." And every time, I never say anything because that's not my function there. But every time I do, I just want to grab these people by their shirts and go, "These people risked everything they had to build the Transcontinental Railroad," because Central Pacific was already a railroad in California. It's not like these people said, "Hey, the government's going to give us a bunch of land. Let's do this." That's not the way it worked. Those four, the Big Four, spent millions of dollars. You're talking about in the 1860s, when $1 million was a few billion in today's money, out of their own pockets to keep the construction on that railroad going, because the government wasn't coming through with the bonds that they thought would be forthcoming. And that's the way it is with almost every corporation that has ever existed. The people who started those corporations, they weren't a bunch of billionaires sitting around saying, "Hey, let's start a corporation and make billions more." Most of these people had virtually nothing when they started, or they were small businessmen, whatever they were when they took that risk and they started these empires. And I'm not saying that everybody was poor when they started these businesses, but most corporations were begun that way by people with an idea, people with some vision, and people willing to risk everything to see their business succeed. And most people who do that don't succeed. But we don't hear about them. The media doesn't talk about them. History doesn't talk about them. But you can find those references to those places that didn't make it. Those people who didn't get what they thought they were going to get when they started, because they were bought out, something, whatever. They couldn't afford to keep going. Many, many oil companies started out like that, where they started buying up smaller companies. One company would do well, and they would start buying up some of these independent drilling rigs way back in the 19th century, the end of the 19th century and the early 20th century. And they were borrowing money to do this stuff. It worked out for some of them, for most it didn't. And corporate histories are littered with those failures. But no one ever talks about that. All they want to talk about are the people who did make it. And were some of these people bad people? Well, sure they were. That's the way it is. Just like with our presidents. Were all of our presidents good people? Absolutely not. Most of them were terrible people. Most politicians in general aren't good people. They're out for themselves. Talked about that many times, but I'm sick of hearing about corporate greed. That is their job. Their job is to make money and create jobs and create opportunities, business opportunities, create investment opportunities. I like to use the example of the Union Pacific Southern Pacific merger, which wasn't really a merger. Legally it was a merger, but in reality it was a hostile takeover. Union Pacific bought Southern Pacific and acquired Southern Pacific's debt, which was $4 billion at that time in 1996. Union Pacific offered all the employees, I know that, and I don't really recall whether this was system-wide or if it was just a Southern Pacific thing, but we were all offered 200 shares of Union Pacific stock at $55 a share with an 8-year option, which meant that after 8 years, you either had to sell your stocks back to the company or you had to buy them at $55 a share. And most people didn't do that. They got greedy. They didn't have any foresight. And I'm one of those people. When the 8 years was up, the stock was still only trading at about $77 a share. I sold mine, and by the time they got done with taxes, I think I ended up with about $1,300, which is nothing. Nothing. It didn't even change my month. Since then, the stock has split 3 times, and as of this morning, when I looked at it, it was trading at 213 or 214, right in that area, dollars a share after 3 splits. If I'd have held on to that and kept reinvesting, I don't even like thinking about it. It makes me ill. But they did that, and it wouldn't have cost any employees a dime to make those investments, but most of them didn't make it. That is not the fault. If you're afraid to get into the market and invest some of your money in your future, if you're afraid to do that, that's not the company's fault. That's not the corporation's fault. That's your fault. I'm in the stock market. I'm not doing very well right now, but I took that chance. It's not working out for me. Does the media talk about that? No, all they talk about is the people who invested money and made $1 bajillion. The stocks that I have right now that aren't doing well they may get back to where they started at some point. They were doing okay until about the first of the year. Biden's economy has ruined the stock market. And I'm living with it and hoping it gets better. I'm not stressing about it. But the fact is, all those companies that I invested in, they all had the same beginnings. They all started out as smaller places, and some of them are making it, some of them have made it, and some of them never will. But as I said, we only hear about the success stories because people want to complain about it. Then these corporations, they do these union deals and they get these contracts and they get all this more money and whatever, and they stop bringing in enough revenue to pay good dividends and attract investors. And what happens? They have to get rid of jobs. Labor is by far the biggest expense of any corporation. And the fastest way to get your books back in balance is to get rid of people. So pick your poison. You can complain about greedy corporations and become a socialist, or you can keep making good money at your job and keep your job and not be laid off because the company that you work for has had to cut back because people are whining about things too much. I don't know, man. It can be a vicious cycle, and I understand that, but you have to have a little vision, and you have to be able to look behind you at the past and say, oh, that's what these guys were doing. They weren't trying to rob people. They were just trying to build a business, and it succeeded. But then go look at the ones that didn't and stop complaining about greedy corporations. If you don't like what a greedy corporation is doing, stop buying their products. I'm talking about a boycott. Boycotts are stupid. Nobody boycotts it's all not buy gas at Chevron on Saturday. Give me a break. I'm talking about people doing this en masse. Stop buying Nike tennis shoes. Stop whatever product it is that you have a problem with the greedy corporation, stop using their product. Maybe their prices will come down. Maybe they'll just go out of business and have to get rid of all those jobs. We live in a capitalist society. Always remember that. If you don't like it, leave. Because America will never become a fully socialist society. It'll only try and it'll fail. Hopefully the American people will have an eye on that and stop it from happening. But we'll see. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Shoot me an email at motorpoet59@gmail.com. Like, share, subscribe, click on the bell if you want to be notified of future content, and we'll see you all later.